I think what follows is that we shouldn't give in to using preferred pronouns, because it seems to me that would actually be bearing false witness. It would be lying about the nature of reality. It would be going along with a lie. And what good reason would there be to go along with this lie in the name of love? Is that truly loving? If we go, if we're going along with this lie. Should we use preferred pronouns? Actually, Erin and I were just recently made aware of a situation where elementary school kids, younger elementary school kids, first day of class, their teacher had each student go around and stand up and share with the rest of the class their preferred pronouns. This is the way to start off the new school year. So, man, how do we as parents navigate that? I'm sure there are many parents out there who 5 years ago, 3 years ago even, never would have thought that their elementary age kid, their first grader, their second grader would have to be navigating the issue of pronouns and what pronouns they should be using. This is our cultural moment. This is where we're at as a culture. So Erin, please tell us, how do we navigate this? Can you please answer this question? How are parents exposed to navigate this? Because I have no clue. Well, let's close in prayer. No.
Yeah, it's a topic. It's a complicated topic that is now just front and center in our culture. And we've heard not only of elementary school, but college, all the way up to college students who professors have had them stand up and say their preferred pronouns. So this is something that as parents raising kids in this culture, we need to be aware of, and we need to think through how do we think about it, and then how do we prepare our kids to navigate these types of situations?
Yeah, and I think there's really probably two issues here, and maybe we'll take the first one, which would be, okay, how do we even think about the idea of preferred pronouns? Mm-hmm. I'm curious if we went to the typical, evangelical church on a Sunday morning and said, hey, what do you think about preferred pronouns to, the Christians there? I'm curious, do you think most Christians would know what to say about that, or would have a biblical view of preferred pronouns? I mean, should Christians use preferred pronouns? And so I think that issue is maybe the first issue to think about with this. But then, I mean, given this example, the second issue to think about is the issue of the education of our kids and what this issue reveals about where we're at in terms of education, and maybe what we need to be aware of as parents. So let's tackle those two issues for this episode.
Okay, the first one that you brought up, I'm thinking, you said, if you went to a typical church, maybe, and ask people what do they think about pronouns. I guess I'm thinking, what answers would they give? It could be varied, but what would their answers be based on? Mm-hmm. Would it be based on, kind of just what they're hearing now and feel like would be the nice thing to do? Or is it based on careful thinking and searching the scriptures?
Yeah.
Or do they think the scriptures have nothing to say? This is 2021. This is about the transgender movement. The Bible has nothing to say about it. And so that I think that would actually be interesting to ask the people in our lives, what do you think about this? Mm-hmm. But then to dig a little deeper and say, now, why do you think that? Is that based off of what? Of what authority are you basing your answer off of? Yeah,
I here would be my hunch. Is that a current word? Do we still use the word hunch? That sounds like is that an old person's word?
I think so.
Okay, so here's my guess. Is that better? You got to stay contemporary. You got to stay relevant. No, but yeah, here would be my guess at how people would, most Christians would answer that. I think there would be probably a tendency to want to say, yes, we should use people's preferred pronouns because we want to love people. We want to show people the love of Christ. We don't want to create some kind of unnecessary obstacle to maybe the gospel or whatever, or to our relationship with them. So I bet a lot of Christians would answer that way. And I think there's a good impulse there that we do want to love people in the culture. But if that's how you were maybe thinking about answering that question, or that's how you would have answered that question, I want you first to step back and say, okay, wait a second. Well, what do I mean by love? Because if you said, well, the best way to love people in the culture with this situation, if someone wants to use different pronouns, is to go along with it. Okay, what do you mean by love? Define love for me, and what does love look like? Because that is a vital question. If we say that we're going to love people, and of course, I think the authority people are going to appeal to is Jesus in the scriptures. Well, right, the Bible clearly is about God's love and that we're supposed to love people. So therefore, this is just, kind of assume that this is the way to love them. So, but yeah, you got to step back and first define what love means. So I think there's this, we don't often critically think about these kind of things. And so it might even take a little bit of time to define what love is, but that's a really important thing that we ought to know if we're commanded by God to love this world and show the love of Christ to this world. Well, what does that exactly mean? Does that mean we simply affirm people in any choice they want to make? Right. And if the answer is no, right, hopefully the answer is obviously no. Love can't mean you just affirm someone in any choice they make, and therefore that's how you love them. I mean, that doesn't work right here, right? In a marriage relationship. Mm-hmm. If I said, Erin, if you truly love me, you're going to affirm me in all of my choices. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are you willing to do that, Erin?
No.
Wow, you're just so kind of.
And with the parent-child relationship, I mean, we know this is true with our children. Yeah,
I mean, you can just give it any number of counterexamples.
Yeah, but okay, so this issue. So let me push back a little bit. So this issue,
bring it,
is
bring the pushback.
It's not. So say it's just the relationship between a teacher and a student, or some of our little neighbor kids in this neighborhood, or like we were on a trip this summer and we were with some other families, and one of the little girls in one of the families was saying that she was non-binary. So this isn't a girl that we've had a long relationship. So, like the whole love thing is kind of, people are like, well, yeah, I don't like love this person. So I just like the kind thing to do. And as Christians, we want to treat people in a loving, kind, respectful way. Shouldn't we just use the pronouns that this little girl who is about 11 wants us to use, or whatever? Well,
I would say kindness seems to be a subset of love, right? I mean, in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, when Paul is defining love throughout that whole chapter, I believe it's verse 4, he says, love is patient, love is kind, right? So showing kindness is actually a form of love. I would say that would be we didn't know that young girl well, but that isn't required for us to show love as believers. It could be a perfect stranger, and we're still able to show them love. Mm-hmm. That is in kindness. That is in patience or gentleness or those kind of things. Often that's what we associate with love. But Scripture also tells us in 1 John that love that we're not to love simply in word or speech, but in our deeds and in truth. Mm-hmm. So the writer of John, First John, who is John, he connects, and of course under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, he connects love with truth. And I think that's throughout the scriptures. And I think that's God's love. God never withholds the truth from us. In fact, when you think about how God deals with humanity throughout the story of Scripture, there's a lot of love and mercy and forgiveness and grace poured out on humanity, and there's also a lot of truth. Mm-hmm. Truth is actually an important piece of loving people. Now, there may be some wisdom on how we go about offering the truth, but I say, okay, so first, before you even get to the interaction with someone else, mm-hmm. we need to think properly about the nature of truth in this particular situation. Mm-hmm. So I think before we can answer the question, should we use someone's preferred pronouns? Number one, defining love, because that's going to be the answer a lot of Christians, I think, are going to default to. But let's just look at the issue of pronouns and what a pronoun is. And so, in fact, I got some pushback recently at an event I did. I was speaking to high school students at an event, and I was talking about the issue of truth, but I was using an illustration to just talk about this culture that we live in, and really I think you can call the culture we live in today a post-truth culture. And that simply means that, objective facts are either not or less persuasive than someone's kind of internal feelings and emotions and personal sentiments, right? In, persuading people of public policy or truth or anything like that. And so ultimately it comes down to this very relativistic view that I determine my truth, right? So this is the post-truth culture. So I gave an illustration of an actress, Ellen Page, who has now transitioned to Elliot Page. Ellen Page is a well-known actress. She's done a number of movies. She was in Inception a number of years ago. It was probably my favorite movie that she's done. Mm-hmm. She's transitioned to Elliot Page. She has gone from, a identifying as a female to now identifying as a male. So I'm talking about this illustration. I put up a little picture of her quote in Time magazine, where she talks about living her now authentic self, but as I'm referring to Elliot, I used a female pronoun. I said she. She now thinks that she is, a male. And I had a couple students come up to me afterwards, and they were bothered that I used the pronoun, a female pronoun for Elliot. Now notice I was fine referring to Ellen as Elliot, but I did not refer to Elliot as a he. Okay, which I think is an important distinction there. And this is, I think, the first thing we need to think about is what do pronouns refer to? Pronouns refer to objective reality. They refer to objective reality. There are males and there are females, meaning there are he's and there are she's. And that's a description of the nature of reality. That's not a preference. Mm-hmm. In fact, when we think about this whole idea of preferred pronouns, we need to remember that pronouns are not merely preferred. Someone may have a preference for what they want to be called, mm-hmm. but that doesn't change that reality doesn't bend to your preferences. So you may want to be called a male if you're a female or vice versa, but just because you prefer to be called a female doesn't change the nature of reality. And it seems to me that pronouns are descriptions of the way things really are. They're descriptions of reality. Mm-hmm. And so you're a woman, I'm a man. You're a she, I'm a he. That's a description of reality. Now, if that's the case, I think what follows is that we shouldn't give in to using preferred pronouns, because it seems to me that would actually be bearing false witness. It would be lying about the nature of reality. It would be going along with a lie. And what good reason would there be to go along with this lie in the name of love? Is that truly loving? If we go, if we're going along with this lie. So I think pronouns seem to be objective in the what they're describing. They're describing the objective nature of reality.
Yeah, and so should Christians even participate in this exercise of proclaiming our pronouns? Because I've seen Christians on social media who say their pronouns.
Or they'll put she / her.
So they're identifying their preferred pronouns. And so if it's true what you're saying, that pronouns simply describe reality, which I agree with you, and that there are two genders, and that we're not able to actually change our gender, then we would be participating in now say I'm going to use the pronouns that actually fit with my gender. But I even wonder if participating in or just subjecting and saying, your work says all of a sudden we want everyone to declare what their pronouns are, and just saying, my pronouns are what my gender are, but thank you for asking. I don't know. So I don't know what that could look like, other than just maybe pushing back gently and saying, I don't need to go with the preferred pronouns. I'm not really going to participate, because we all know what my pronouns are, because I'm a woman. And
so you're extrapolating, to all these other situations here. You're saying, hey, if I'm hearing you right, even if this is our view, then yeah, even putting on your Instagram profile he, him, that's not something that's consistent with the Christian view of reality.
Well, yeah, I guess I'm saying even if you participate in the activity of declaring your personal pronouns, that even participating in that, even if you identify with the pronouns that match your gender, it's like playing along with this idea that we can have preferred pronouns that can change, that aren't matched up with our gender. And I'm saying, as Christians, so a Christian college student, when you're asked to go around the room, if you say, what would I do? Well, that in that situation, maybe as Christians, we should stand up and say, my name is Erin and I'm a woman. Mm-hmm. And so you can call me a woman because that's what I am. Yeah. And almost not even participate with my preferred pronouns are she, her.
Yeah. Not to go along, to get along.
Yeah.
But that the Christian view might require that we get maybe a lot uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And not just say, well, my personal pronouns are he, him. And so I can say that because that's not bearing false witness. Yeah. But you're saying it's not just a matter of even bearing false witness. It's we don't go along with this charade, which really in the Christian view, that's what it turns out to be. This is a charade. This is trying. You have so many just examples of this cultural pressure that's trying to move us towards affirming what turns out to be a different worldview. And this is why, and let's just pause here for a second. I think this is why this is so important. is that this is a worldview issue. And what is being communicated here is something that is contrary to the truth. It's contrary to the Christian worldview. It's teaching an alternate view of reality. And there's all these different ways that the culture is trying to educate us along these lines. And it's trying to do that with our kids now at the earliest of ages. And it tries to do it with us as adults, socialize us to think in these terms, or at the very least, to just go along with it. And I think you're saying something maybe a little more radical than just don't hold this view. Don't use the wrong pronouns. If they're descriptions of reality, don't use the wrong pronouns, but don't even go along with the whole charade. And I mean, I think that makes a ton of sense and fits with kind of our obligation to bear witness to the truth, to be truth tellers. And that maybe be a very important way that we love the culture and the world around us. One of the most important ways that I think you love me and I love you is sometimes telling each other the truth when it makes us uncomfortable, because it's actually what's best for us.
Yeah. And I'm thinking I got to that place in my mind thinking about these first graders. And, you know, our youngest is a fourth grader. So thinking about our fourth grader, even participating in the going around the room because of what you're saying is right. It's the worldview. So what's the worldview behind having all these little ones stand up and identify their pronouns, which is unnecessary for them to do, because we can look around the room. All the little first graders can look around the room and they can see the boys and the girls, you know. And so it's having them participate in this activity that's pushing them to say, no, this is normal, that you need to identify it because you could have been born one way, but actually be stuck in a body that's not really you. And so I guess that's what I was thinking of. I wouldn't want my children to have to participate in this kind of thing. And why is that? It's the same reason I wouldn't want to participate, and then maybe that I shouldn't participate in it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now the pronoun issue is probably, it's different. I think it would be different than, and I think this would be a good distinction, than using a name that someone prefers. It seems to me that pronouns are objective descriptions of reality, but names are preferential. We have preferences. And so, for instance, my name is Brett Kunkel. I typically prefer to go by Brett, but you prefer to call me Kunkel, right? That's a subjective preference. We know a friend, you know, his name is Robert, but he likes to go by Bob or Bobby. You might just come up with a nickname. I mean, we know people who just don't even necessarily like their first name, and they just come up with a different name. We had a friend like that in college, and she just went by a completely different name that she created. It wasn't on her birth certificate. Her parents didn't give it to her. But that seems to be more in line with a personal preference. And so if Ellen Page wants to be known as Elliot, I don't have a problem with that, because that's not, the name seems to be the subjective preference versus a pronoun, which is an objective description. And so I think we can use people's preferred names. Elliot, I'd be happy to address that person as Elliot, without also then referring to Elliot as a he. Now, so I think that's a good distinction that's maybe helpful in this.
And that's with adults, though, too. Again, going back to the kid issue, and we're going to get into this, what's happening in schools, but you have the issue of children now wanting to change their own names that they were given by their parents.
Yeah.
And what do we do in those situations where you have maybe a parent who, well, maybe we should specifically talk about it, but there's these situations now in schools where the parent has no idea that the child is wanting to change their name and their pronouns. But I do think in general, it is a good distinction to make that pronouns are different than someone saying they like to be called by a different name.
Yeah.
And respectfully calling them that name. And actually, I do think that can be helpful when you're in these situations, like we were with this the little girl who identified as non-binary. You can just keep calling her by her name. And then because you're not saying, when she's around, you're not saying she. you're calling her by her name. And so you're not in a situation when you're using those pronouns where she's not there. And then typically, and you can just say her name. And that's a way to avoid having to be put into the pronoun situation as well.
And it's not just merely trying to avoid conflict. It's like, no, that's just consistent across the board. If you had a nickname, your name's Jennifer, but you prefer to be called Jenny, we'd have no problem with that. That's consistent.
Yeah.
It's this other thing that I think that's problematic.
Yeah.
Now, of course, if you're talking to the transgender individual, there's different considerations as well. So, for instance, if I was talking to Elliot Page, the actress, I would not, in her presence, refer to her with female pronouns as much as I could avoid that, because I wouldn't want to cause unnecessary offense to her. So I wouldn't try to go out of my way to say, oh, that's hers, I'd say, oh, that's Elliot's. And that's just, I think, wisdom.
Right.
For that particular individual. So I'm not going to be a jerk about it. And that's, I think, the other thing here is we're not, this is not motivated.
Being a jerk meaning looking for opportunities to use the pronouns they don't want you to use.
Yeah. I'm not looking to kind of,
like
needle them a little bit or prove exactly. Okay. In that situation with that individual, I would just use their name. Use the name that they preferred, Elliot versus Ellen, and so. But typically, often when you're using pronouns, you're not actually in the presence of that person.
Yeah, typically.
I don't, when I'm talking to you, I'm not like, oh, hey, that's hers. So that's not
it's
often
rare. Yeah.
Not often something you have to worry about.
Yeah.
So, but I think that's just an important disclaimer. Is that with the transgender individual, the person who's experiencing some gender dysphoria, there's a sensitivity that's appropriate, especially if what we know from social science is true. That these are often, maybe in all cases, these are hurting people if they're struggling with gender dysphoria. We want to be loving and compassionate and gentle and kind.
Yes.
And in that situation, of course, one of the most important truths for that individual is the truth of the gospel. But also still, even with the individual, thinking about this idea of bearing witness to the truth. And I say that because I've watched some videos from what are known as detransitioners. These are people who have gone through the transition from male to female or female to male and now have come back. They've detransitioned, right, to their and here's this is a terminology that I would not use, again, because I think it goes along with the charade, but they're sex assigned at birth, right? So I think as we talk to our kids about this stuff, as we talk to one another about this stuff, we need to pay attention to our language. It's our biological sex. Or you could say it's our sex. Because sometimes now even biological sex is used to distinguish from gender identity, right? And there's a whole probably discussion there about even sex and gender. Aren't those the same thing? Our culture's going to say, no, sex is what you're assigned at birth. Gender is what you identify. Okay. Well, there's a sense where I think maybe that distinction, the culture makes that, but I think it's very valid for us to ask the question, why would why would you separate those things?
Yeah.
Why would you detach sex from gender?
We did a podcast on that actually.
Yes,
already.
we did.
So on the whole gender topic. But yeah, it's again where the culture wants to push us in a way to think about things in a certain way and to twist or distort sometimes what we know is true. And they want to coerce us to think different things or even just to affirm things that aren't true.
Yeah. Okay, so Erin, before we move on to kind of the second issue that we talked about here, okay, to the parent out there whose kid was just asked in their second grade class, first day of school, what is your preferred pronoun? What's the quick answer to that parent? Like, how does that parent help their kid navigate it? Okay, so what we've said so far is just here's the proper view. Pronouns aren't merely preferred. Pronouns are description of reality. So let's not bear witness. Let's not bear false witness. Let's speak the truth. Mm-hmm. And so not using preferred pronouns, not calling a female a he. Okay, well, how do we help our kids navigate this? Mm-hmm. Is there stuff that we can do practically? I'm guessing most parents, if that happened to their second grader, it's not even been on their radar to think about preparing their kid.
Yeah, because most of us trust the teachers in schools that we send our kids to. And so it would be pretty jarring to have something like this happen. And so often we think, oh, well, this isn't going to happen to us, even if we've heard of things happening. We don't think that's going to happen because in our spheres and our communities, we trust the people, especially the people we put our kids in community with. So I think, we did talk about in that gender podcast that we did about teaching our kids about a healthy picture of sexuality and gender from a very young age. And so you can go back and listen to that podcast. We do give some really practical ideas on how to do that. And so that it's just a normal conversation and that this whole idea of sexuality and stuff is just something that you've talked about as a family. And if this does come up and you haven't had those conversations, start right now, right away.
So very practically, it could just be a parent sitting with their kid or their kid comes home from school and you just want to have a casual conversation, but you could just say, hey, if you were asked at school, what are your preferred pronouns? Do you understand what that question means? Number one. Mm-hmm. But then number two, what would you say? What would you say? And have that, and that might be just a really good way to have that conversation with your kid. Yeah. I'm just trying to get real practical here for parents out there. Yeah. And so that might be the starting point, is to have that, ask your kid that question, see how they think about this. Mm-hmm. And then that might then give you a way to kind of coach them through this and an opportunity to educate them a little bit. Yeah. And this is where, we talk a lot about helping our kids understand that we're different. Mm-hmm. Our views are going to be different. We have a different worldview. We have a true worldview. We have an accurate picture of reality. And now, I guess, helping our kids see we live in a culture with a radically different view. A view where men can transform into women on the basis of their personal feelings. Where
men say they can transform into women.
Exactly. So we have to pay careful attention to our language. Yeah. This is what our culture is claiming. Yeah. And then helping our kids see this is flies in the face of reality. It's not true. It's like saying 2 + 2 = 4. I'm sorry. That's the true view of reality. That would be the Christian view. No, it's like saying 2 + 2 = 5. Right. And helping our kids from the earliest of ages now go against the tide.
Right. And that's, to use a sports analogy, that's playing offense. That's what we suggest you do right away.
That's a really good way to think about it. Unpack that a little bit more. What do you mean playing offense?
prepping our kids. We're preparing them for these conversations
before they have the conversation.
Before they have them. So going back again to this story in the summer where this little girl told our son, that she was non-binary. Our son actually knew. Our 10-year-old knew what that meant because we've had conversations just about the language the culture uses. So the other little boy that was with our son had no clue what she was and was like, what is that? And then our son said, oh, it just means she doesn't want to say she's a girl or a boy. She wants to say she's neither. And so just a quick, definition. So that's playing offensively where you're of course, at age appropriate times, you're defining terms and things that are going on in the culture. And we can't be offensive about everything because we have no, there are going to be things. So defensively, what do you do? Because your question was if their kid comes home and this has happened.
Yeah.
So that's where, I would want to know, what had happened, how they felt about it. I would have lots of conversations of trying to stay calm as a mom and a dad, because you're protective of your kids, but wanting to know, was that upsetting? What happened in the classroom? And then I would just have very candid conversations of, I'm assuming this would only happen in a public school, not a Christian school. But so you have the
which
conversation.
We actually probably shouldn't assume that nowadays.
I know.
Probably a lot less often, but I would not be surprised that someone's out there going, actually, in the Christian school I sent my kid to, they had a teacher
who did that.
Who maybe, and that doesn't even fit with the view of the administration or the school in general, but this individual teacher did that, did the preferred pronoun thing with the students. So we can't even assume Christian school is necessarily. But
assuming this would be a public school, which our kids have, gone to public school. And so it's having the conversation. And this is offensive, being offense. If you're sending your kids to public school, hopefully this has already been in the vocabulary of, listen, the people that you are in school with, your teachers, your administrators, don't have a Christian worldview. They don't see reality the way we see reality. They don't even I'm just thinking about paying attention to our language. It's not just that they don't see reality as we see reality. They don't see reality as it really is. It's not just my view of reality versus their view of reality. Yeah. Right? It's saying, hey, no, the Christian worldview is the accurate description of reality. We know this for a number of reasons. This is where, things like Christian worldview training and apologetics is so vital and so important. But it's that they see reality falsely. Mm-hmm. And so you would need to have the conversation now, if you haven't, of, listen, where you go to school, they think that you can change from being a boy or a girl. We know that God makes boys and girls, but they think that we can change God's design and that you can just feel a certain way and then that will be your reality. And then that everyone's supposed to play along. So that's why they do that at school. That's why they asked everyone to stand up and do that. So it isn't true. And it's sad that your teacher believes that. And it's sad for the kids in your class that believe that, because we know that it's only going to bring about problems in your life. When you don't believe what's true, then that has really bad implications for your life. And so it's sad, but we want you to know what happened there isn't reality. It's not true. What your teacher said, or your principal or the person at this school assembly said, it's not true. Yeah. And then as a parent, what should you do? I mean, here the school is teaching a false view of reality. I think this is where Christian parents and
even not just even Christian parents. I think there's a lot of parents who aren't Christians who would be allies with this, allies with us on their views on this.
Yeah.
But so many are silent and quiet and just go along to get along. And that is just not an option here. If there's going to be any salvaging of this institution of public education, which I think brings up a larger issue here. So I think we kind of navigated the pronoun issue. I think hopefully our view is clear here. And so we got to figure out ways to help our kids not go along with this. Okay, so going back to what you just said a few minutes ago here, they're teaching a false view of reality. So I think that brings up this larger issue that I kind of mentioned is the second issue at the beginning of this podcast, the issue of the education of our kids. Mm-hmm. And so now we're talking about our kids getting instruction or teaching at their school that is false. It would be like the teacher saying that 2 + 2 = 5. What we're then having to come in and do is to tell our kids, what you were saying is you got to prep your kids to say they've taught you something that's false. Mm-hmm. So that brings up this second issue of the education of our kids, which I think I think we have a lot to say on that, particularly when it comes to this issue as well, but just that larger issue. And that is going to be a discussion, I think, that's going to take a little more time than we have here. Yeah. And so let's talk about that second issue related to pronouns, related to the transgender issue in the next podcast. And let's just kind of summarize where we've been here, because I think what we've been trying to do through this podcast is take this issue of, should we use preferred pronouns? We want to think through, well, what is a preferred pronoun? What is a pronoun? Is a pronoun something that actually can merely be preferred? Well, it can be preferred. You could prefer to be called a he if you're actually a she, but that doesn't change the nature of reality. And so we're saying that's inconsistent.
And should we participate in this activity of declaring our own personal preferred pronouns?
We're saying no, we shouldn't participate in that. And we need to really examine our lives, our homes, education, work, social media use, and see how are there ways in which we are participating in that. And so that's the first issue. I think that's good ground that we need to cover. If you want more thinking on this issue, if you want some good thinking on the transgender issue itself, let's give one resource in case, we've given this resource before, but it's a book by Ryan Anderson, which is it's banned by Amazon. So you can't get it on Amazon because they banned it because apparently it's, too controversial. It's actually not politically correct. It doesn't hold the correct view of this.
Yeah,
so they banned it.
Amazon's claim is that it's lying, right? Like it's not telling the truth about reality. So they're making claims about
that should be a whole nother podcast we do about maybe the kind of the cancel culture stuff. But When Harry Became Sally by Ryan Anderson, responding to the transgender moment, I would say get this book. Mm-hmm. Or at the very least, go onto YouTube, type in Ryan Anderson transgender, listen to one of his talks. Because in order for you and I to help our kids navigate this issue, we have got to be equipped. We have got to know the truth. And we can't cruise along in the culture anymore. Mm-hmm. Those days are long gone. Mm-hmm. If we're going to equip our kids with the truth, we are going to have to start studying and seeking out the truth and equipping ourselves and being able to know what we believe and why we believe it if we're going to help our kids.
Yeah. And I'd want to say one source too that we're actually going to talk more about in the second part of this podcast. But you mentioned, it made me think because you mentioned, well, it's not just Christian parents that are going to be against it. And we do have allies in the culture who are not Christians on this issue of the gender confusion that's going on. And Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, She is not a Christian, and she has done so much research on this topic, and especially in the topic of kids and education and what's going on with that, which is going to be our topic for the next podcast. But that is another resource that I just think is mandatory reading for parents. It just, we need to read both of these books to know what we're facing as we try to raise kids in this culture.
Yeah. And in order for us to be adequately equipped to equip our kids, if our kids hear from us a thoughtful, intelligent explanation of these things, if we don't just say, oh, you shouldn't do that stupid stuff, that's dumb, and we just kind of dismiss it, that's not going to be effective, and that's going to backfire on us. We need to have an intelligent, truthful, compassionate answer that this doesn't fit the nature of reality. And because it doesn't, it actually will bring harm into people's lives. And we care too much about people to go along with the lies of the culture. So that's really the onus is on us as parents. And okay, that answers the question: should we use preferred pronouns? No, that's not consistent with a biblical worldview. Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.